Like your hat.
Thank you.
There we go.
Right, well, welcome everyone to the inaugural 2023 session of our clinical course. Thank you so much for joining. I know it's very early for some and pretty late for others, so we really appreciate you making the time. And thank you so much, Dr. Quinet, for being with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Nora for a brief introduction, after which Dr. Quinet will talk for about an hour. We'll have a short 5-minute break, and then we'll reconvene for the typical question and answer format. If you don't mind keeping yourselves on mute primarily, just avoids feedback. And if you need to raise your hand for a question, it's under the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or you can drop in the chat and I'll, pop in.
Okay. Welcome, Antonio. So Dr. Quinet is an analyst member of the School of Psychoanalysis of the Forms of the Lacanian field. He's a doctor of philosophy. He's a playwright, a professor in the master's and doctorate program of psychoanalysis, health and society at the university there. He's a director of a theater group, which I've attended in New York, which is wonderful. And the author of several books on psychoanalysis and theater, including Lacan's clinical technique, Lacanian analysis. I don't know if I did that justice, but it's Lacanian analysis with L-A-C-K and then A and then anion. Anyway, so it's over to you, Antonio. It's so good to see you. And I like the hat, by the way.
Well, thank you for this very kind invitation of the Washington Forum. And well, I'm going to talk about one paper, Freud's paper on technique, entitled On Beginning the Treatment. The treatment is in the 12th, volume 12 of the English edition. Is a paper of 1913. Well, and among Freud's paper on technique, there is one entitled On Beginning the Treatment, where he mentions his habit of taking on the patient, at first provisionally for a period of 1 or 2 weeks, which he calls preliminary experiment or trial period. His reason, well, and I'm going to work this text with the concept, Lacanian concept of preliminary interviews. Well, and it's not only an invention of Lacan. You're going to see that we can find it in Freud's text. His reason for employing this experimental treatment is the following. If one breaks off within this period, one spares the patient the distressing impression of an attempt cure having failed. He does not explain why the treatment could fail. However, as we shall see further on, the treatment's continuation depends on transference. In this same paper, Freud asserts that the analyst's first objective is to attach the patient to his treatment, and not the analyst himself as a person, to attach to the treatment. Although Freud doesn't explore the theme of transfer thoroughly during the experimental period, he is very clear about another of its tasks, diagnosis, and in particular, the differential diagnosis between neurosis and psychosis. Lacan's expression, preliminary interviews, corresponds to Freud's preliminary treatment or this trial period. The expression indicates that there is a threshold, an entry in analysis, that we have this period and the analysis. Into analysis that is not the same thing as the entries given onto the analyst's office. This preliminary working period is prior to analysis proper, which begins not exactly in continuity, but Freud doesn't explore this rupture, this changing. It's not, but my point of view is there is not a continuity to this initial work, but as the name experimental treatment itself suggests, after a rupture, a cut that qualifies a change and determines a before and an after analysis. This cut corresponds to the crossing of the threshold into a new social bond, the analyst discourse, which is our case, would be the analytical discourse. In our everyday practice of analysis, it is not always easy, as we know, to detect this turning point, this passage. But I think we can be aware of it. Why is it so? Because in both phases, let's talk like this, the phase of the preliminary treatment and the analysis itself, free association is at work and commence. This preliminary experience, says Freud, is itself the beginning of psychoanalysis and must conform to its rules. What rules? We know that really the only real rule is free association. Is this, but so free association is in the trial period and in analysis, of course, itself. So we might make a distinction, however, in that during this initial phase, one may allow the patients to be nearly all the talking and explain nothing, that's right, nothing more than what is absolutely necessary to get him to get on with what he's saying. Thus, we have an indication that at this moment, the analyst's core is merely to keep the patient's discourse going on. We must not, however, forget that according to Freud, there are also diagnostic reasons for beginning with a trial period that I'm going to talk in a few minutes. It is at this moment that the question of diagnosis is at stake. The preliminary treatment may have the same structure as analysis, but yet it is not the same. What a paradox. From the very beginning, there is a paradox which we may express as preliminary treatment equal to analysis and is different from analysis. This is the paradox, which we may read as preliminary treatment is the same and is not the same. Well, so first, free association maintains the identification of the preliminary treatment and analysis. But the period of diagnosis renders the preliminary treatment different from analysis. I think according to this reading of Freud's text, we can say that this is the moment for the analyst to think about the diagnosis of the structure of this patient. And afterwards, it's okay. See, he let him go on, or her. So the analyst must submit himself to this paradox, wherefrom he will decide whether or not to accept the demand for analysis. Because we are not obliged to accept everyone. There is a moment that we accept or not. The same for the patients. He goes to see us for analysis. He's a candidate, and and he is a candidate for us, and we are a candidate for him or her. So we must decide together if we accept one another. So, and this is the period that the analyst is going to see, well, I think it's better if you want to see someone else. I think it's going to be, it's not here that you're going to make do your analysis, or okay, this is the couch and you're going, and let's begin the trip, the analytical trip. So from the analyst's point of view, the preliminary interviews may be divided in two periods: a time to comprehend and a moment to conclude. You know, the logic time, Lacanian's logic time, is to understand, the time to understand, and the moment is to understand, to comprehend. The logic time in Lacan, we say the time, le temps comprendre, the time to understand, and the moment of conclusion, to conclude, when he makes his decision if he's going to accept or not. It is in time, this moment of conclusion, that the psychoanalyst act is performed and assumed by the analyst, the act which transforms the preliminary interviews into analysis proper. This cut, which this passage implies, is an act which can be signified to the subject. When, for instance, he indicates the analyst that the analyst should lie down. This cut is the analyst's way of manifesting to the candidate that the analyst accepts him or her for analysis. It is an important indication, since, of course, sometimes the patient feels himself or herself so involved in transfer and so on, that he or her precipitates himself into the couch immediately. No, and so even before the analyst indicates to him to lie down. It is an important indication, since the fact that the analyst has accepted that someone should come to his office does not mean that he has accepted him for analysis. The subject knows he is a candidate to be an analyst and hopes the analyst he has chosen will in turn accept him for analysis. In constituting this double choice, the subject is impelled to elaborate a demand for analysis, which can be verified, as we shall see in practice, as a hystericization. Hysterification, la hystérisation, hysterification, to make hysteric, hysterification factor in the production of an analytical symptom. So we can divide the very didactic division, of course, because everything is all together. Divide this in three functions, logical functions of the preliminary treatment, of the preliminary interviews, which is rather logical than chronological. First, the symptomatic function, the diagnostic function, and the transference function. Let's begin with this symptomatic function. In analysis, the demand should not be accepted in its raw form. It should be questioned. The analyst's reply to someone who arrives in an explicit demand for analysis cannot be, for example, the proposition of a contract and a fee. Lacan tells us there is only one true demand which leads to the beginning of an analysis, the demand to be rid of a symptom. Someone who asks for analysis to know himself or herself better would receive a clear answer from Lacan. He wrote it down. I send him off. He does not consider this wanting to know oneself better as a demand, deserving an answer. The demand for analysis stands in correlation to the elaboration of the analytical symptom, as Lacan established this expression, an analytical symptom as such. What is at stake during the preliminary interviews is not whether or not the subject is analyzable. We don't, mechanics, have this category as he is analyzable or not. Everyone is potentially analyzable. The analyzability is a function of the symptom and not of the subject. The analyzability of the symptom is not an attribute or a quality such as something which pertains to the symptom. It should be sought after in order the treatment may begin transforming the symptom the subject complains about into analytic symptom. The subject may present himself to the analyst to complain about his symptom and even ask him to rid him of it, but it is not enough. Or you can say the symptom and also anguish or something, an inhibition of anguish or a suffering, indeterminate suffering or a suffering in the social bonds. But this complaint must become a demand which is addressed to that analyst and must move from the status of an answer to the status of a question for the subject in order to impel himself to decipher it. So how to transform the question that the analyst addresses to you, that you must address to him, and to turn it to be, rather than a question to you, a question for himself. Well, in Freudian, and of course, the symptom as is a form of jouissance, and at the same time is something that put a limit to the subject, the symptom. So there is something that you must not, as you're not a psychiatrist, to you cannot be eager to get the symptom, to get rid of from the subject. Let's cut the symptom and that we solve the problem. No, and on the contrary, the symptom is very important for us because is a way of for the subject to express himself unconsciously. Of course, as the symptom is a formation of the unconscious. So it's very different what we do with the symptom when the analyst comes to see us. We're not going to promise to get rid of the symptom, but on the contrary, we're going to analyze the symptom. But not yet. We must transform first the symptom he is complaining about, to an analytical symptom. In Freudian terms, this problem may be set forth as follows. Why did the repression fail? As the symptom is a return of the repressed material, why did the repression fail and the repressed return, allowing the symptom to be formed? So I think that as I was, let's say, I was formed as a psychiatrist. I entered in psychoanalysis with psychosis. And we are, and as a good Lacanian, we know that we must look for the beginning of the symptoms of the phenomena of psychosis. What was, I don't know how to say in English, how and when it was déclenché. How do you say?
Triggering?
Wilfried, how do you say déclenché? La psychose a été déclenchée.
The onset, the unchaining. The onset or the unchaining, Antonio? Bunji.
Provoked.
The onset, the beginning.
The onset.
But
onset,
the word
the onset.
provoked, the word provoked indicates that there is something that makes it start.
Yes. So we are used to look for this onset with psychosis, but we must do the same thing as with neurosis. When did it begin? How was? In what period? What was going on? Because there is, if we are Freudian, we know that the symptom has two times. When it was formed, and then it was completely calmed down and repressed, and then with something happened, provokes, when something happened, it provokes the onset of the symptom. For instance, the red man's death, for example, presents him itself as a symptom, which comes as an answer to the subject when the jouissance emerges upon hearing the story of the punishment recounted by the cruel captain. It is upon this factor that the whole question of the depth and the possibility of pay, it is established. So it was a very precise moment. And sometimes there are also precise moments in the life of the subject that the symptoms arise. In the case of a patient who presents himself to the analyst with an obsessive idea which makes him suffer, it is necessary that this symptom, which is signified for the subject, once more acquires its signifier dimension and implicates both the subject and his desire. So something that is blocked as a signified must acquires the signifier dimension to enter in the chain, in the signifier chain, and what that free association promotes. So the symptom appears as a first as a signified of the other, of the big other, you know, as we see in the desire graph, I say desire graph, le graph du désir, desire graph, as a signified, that Lacan writes like this, a signified of the other, and which is addressed as a signified, addressed to the analyst, which is addressed to the analyst. The analyst must transform the symptom into the question, the famous que voi. That is the question called desire. Desire is thus a question which the analyst must introduce in the symptom's dimension. For the patient himself, ask himself, what does that mean? What is it about? Etc. Because one of the most important things that we, for the analysis, is the desire to know. If you don't have an analysis, if you have an analyst who doesn't have this desire of knowledge, desire to know what is going on, the analysis is impossible. Of course, the knowledge we're going to see, the third factor, the third item, the transference function, this knowledge, the analysis attributes to the analyst, but he must be touched by this desire to know, desire of knowledge, which is the opposed to the repressing, to the repressing strength. Well, the constitution of the analytic symptoms occurs simultaneously to the establishment of transference, which brings forth the subject supposed to know, sujet supposé savoir, which is the pivot of transference. This moment when the symptom is transformed in an enigma, a question, is a moment of hystericization, since the symptom then represents the subject's division addressed to the analyst. As long as the symptom is part of the subject's life, the life he has accustomed to before meeting the analyst, it can be considered a sign, that which represents something to someone, the symptom as a sign. When this symptom is transformed into a question, it appears as an expression to the subject's division. It is at this moment that the symptom, upon reaching the right address, the analyst, becomes explicitly analytical. This is what Lacan means when he says that the analyst completes the symptom. It's bizarre, this expression. We analysts complete the symptom. I understand that the symptom is addressed to us, addressed to, tell me, Mr. Madam, What does this mean? Or even, but a dream also can be addressed to the analyst. An unconscious formation, the unconscious formation addressed to the analyst. That it's not rare that the analysis begin to the analysis with a dream, dreaming with an analyst, even before he comes to analysis. Sometimes he comes to me and say, I have a dream with you, that you were, I don't know what, or father or mother, or even I was coming to see you. So the transfer is established before the analysts do it. So it can occur, of course. It happens. But but it's not, of course, it's easier when it happens like that, because the transfer is established and he brings you the symptom and what his questions or her questions, etc. So bearing this symptom, the subject turns to the analyst with a question. What does this mean? What does this signify? And because one supposes that the analyst detains the truth about one symptom in a form of a production. So we see exactly the here what Lacan says. When this happens, we see the hysterical discourse. The subject, divided subject, the divided subject addresses him to an analyst as a signifier, master signifier, to produce his knowledge. So if we put the little way here, we have the hysterical discourse. This is the jouissance. This is the jouissance of the symptom. So this is the symptom represented by the subject addressing him to the analyst. So we have, this turning is the hysterization of the discourse, is one of the functions of the preliminary interviews. What I was calling the symptom function. So, what a knowledge about what? A knowledge about the jouissance of this symptom. But this is what the analysis wants from us. But Lacan says, in this discourse, there is a barrier between the knowledge produced and the jouissance of the symptom. So, what is the solution of this problem? Of course, the analyst is not going to give any knowledge to the analyst. And this is the question. What the analysts do with this function of the subject supposed to know? We're going to see that in a few minutes, but I can say immediately that the analyst cannot answer, cannot respond from this place, because this is maintaining the hysterical discourse, and the hysterical subject is going to say, you're wrong. It's not like this. It's not like you don't know anything. Let's say, give me another proposition, another hypothesis, because it's no use to say anything about the knowledge that we began to perceive, to grasp Well, this maneuver, la manœuvre de transfert, is destined to fail if you give him or her this knowledge, due to the impotence of the knowledge to explain the truth about Jewish sense. This barrier that I was show you is the impotence of the discourse. There's a barrier here. Well, nonetheless, a social bond, according to the definition of discourse, which of the hysteric discourse is established. It's not exactly the analytical discourse. The analyst discourse is going to be in the act of the analyst to transform this social bond in another one, the analytical discourse. The enigma, so the enigma, we can say the S bar is the enigma, is addressed to the analyst, who is supposed to withhold the knowledge. The analyst is thus included in the symptom, completing it. During the preliminary interviews, it is therefore a question of provoking the hysterization of the subject, since the hysteric is the name given to the divided subject. As Lacan says about the hysteric subject, he or her is the exercing unconscious. L'inconscient en exercice.
The unconscious in exercise. The unconscious in exercise.
Better, unconscious in exercise is in an academy of exercising. Is the unconscious in exercise. Well, let's go to the diagnostic function and then to the transferent function. The question of differential diagnosis in psychoanalysis presents itself only as regards the direction of the analytical treatment. Diagnosis and treatment stands in a logical relation to one another of implication. If diagnosis, so treatment. The implication of the operation of implication. So it's no use for us to do a diagnosis without out of this setting. The diagnosis in psychoanalysis makes sense only if it serves to conduct the analysis. It can only be made on the symbolic level, where the fundamental questions of the subject are articulated, says Lacan in the La question préliminaire à tout traitement possible de la psychose. The preliminary question of for the treatment of psychosis. And Lacan established in this text the symbolic level, the big other, the level of the unconscious, is where the fundamental questions of the subject are articulated: sex, death, reproduction, paternity, etc., and are related to the Oedipus. In the symbolic order, the effect of the inscription of the name of the father in the other of language is the production of phallic signification. I'm talking about the paternal metaphor, which allows the subject to inscribe himself in the division of the sexes. If it is therefore from the standing point of the symbolic, the symbolic register, that the structural differential diagnosis can be made, considering the three ways of denying the Oedipus. We're going to do some recapitulation fast of the three denials, as Lacan established from Freud's point of view, that everyone denies the Oedipus. Nobody wants to be castrated. we hate castrated and everybody denies it. And there is 3 different forms of denying it, which corresponds to the 3 clinical structures. One type of denials, denial the element, but conserves it. Manifesting itself in 2 ways. In the neurotics, repression, Verdrängung, repression, a denial which denies the element but remains in the unconscious, the repressed. In the perverse, denial, which denies but maintains the element denied, not in the unconscious, but in the fetish. And the foreclusion, Verwerfung, is a type of denial which leaves no trace or vestige. It does not conserve, it wipes out. Both types of denial, which conserve the traces, imply so neurosis and perversions imply the admittance of Oedipus in the symbolic, which does not occur on the foreclusion. So we have the name of the father in neurosis and perversion, but the name of the father is foreclosed in psychosis. Each way of denying has a concomitant form of return. Well, this is a logical, Freudian logical proposition that everything that is denied returns in the real. I can take this proposition that Lacan established to psychosis, and we can generalize. He says that which is foreclosed in the symbolical returns in the real register. So in the psychosis, the denying of foreclusion, we have the return in the real, the hallucination, for instance. And neurosis, with the denial of repression, returns in the symbolical, has effects on the real, but returns in the symbolic as the symptom, dreams, etc. Freudian sleep, etc. And the perversion also returns in the symbolic with the effects on the real. So we have this the phenomenon in neurosis is the symptom, the phenomenon in the perversions is the fetish. Well, in psychosis, the element foreclosed in the symbolic returns in the real in the form of mental automatism, hallucinations, delirium. Since the return is carried out in the real, away from the symbolic, one uses this neologism, Lacanian neologism, foreclusion, coming from the French, where the term designates a legal process which has prescribed, which we can no longer mention because legally it no longer exists. How does this structural differential diagnosis manifest itself in practice? Freud tells us that in neurosis, the Oedipus complex is the victim of a shipwreck, which corresponds to the hysterio-amnesia. The neurotic does not remember what happened in his childhood. We have the example of the rat man giving to us the phrase of the symptom, if I see a nude woman, my father must die. The repression of the representation of his desire, a nude human, that his father should die, returns in the symbolic. Or let's say the mother in this place returns in the symbolic in the form of a symptom, the obsessional thought expressed in this phrase that indicates his Oedipal structure, you know, the desire and the transgression and the law and the punishment. If I see a new human, my father must die. So my father must die, the mother of the murder of the father, no? And the object of desire, linked in a, we see the Oedipal structure. And if you analyze, you're going to find the Oedipal structure. Not exactly the mother and the father, but this structure of the law of the transgression of Jewish sense in every symptom, neurotic symptom. We can say that Lacan later on summarized it, saying that the symptom, when he said the symptom is the name of the father, since Freud, we have the symptom as the name of the father, as the horse for Hans, etc. So we see the Oedipian structure of the symptom in every neurotic symptom. The symptom thus furnishes an access to the organization of the symbolic, which represents the subject. That's why a symptom is so important, and we must receive it. Accueillir, receive it. How do you say? Take care of the symptom with the symptoms of your analysis, because they are precious. Because how can I say? Is the best he can do is the symptom. So, because it represents himself, him or herself. So it's not something to get to put off, to erase, as the psychiatrist says, and as the analysis asks us to do. Please get me rid of this symptom. But the symptom represents the subject. Well, in perversion, castration is admitted in the symbolic along with the concomitant denial. This mechanism, as well as the other types of refusal, occurs in the relation of the female sex, according to Freud. On the one hand, there is a description of the absence of a penis on the woman, and therefore of the difference between the sexes. But on the other hand, this description is denied. The return of this particular type of refusal becomes crystallized in the fetish, whose symbolic determination can be apprehended in the language structures, as we can see in the example with which Freud begins his article on the fetishes. It is interesting to note that Freud does not use the classical example of fetishists as the Lenatis, I don't know how to say that. For instance, those who venerate the foot, underwear, or any object closer to common sense. Freud exposes the case of a patient who had, as a condition of his desire, a link to a certain shine on the nose. I don't know if everybody knows that. It's fantastic. On the other hand, analysis revealed the translinguistic play of words which allowed the link to be understood. Shine in German, glance, is homophone of glance in English. Glance in German is shine, and glance in English is the look. The secret of this fetish resided resided in the fact that in the first years of his childhood, this subject had lived in an English-speaking country. This was the clue which led to the constitution of the fetish, which demonstrate how it was determined by the symbolic elements of the language in this translinguistic play. These symbolic elements present in the subject's histories and denotes as well the drive object, the look, the drive, the object of the scopic drive, the look present in this fetish. So it is symbolic because it's structured as a language, with a language. So in psychosis, however, the signifier returns in the real, pointing out the relation of exteriority the subject maintains with the signifier, and with troubles of speech in general, as can be verified by any clinician who comes across a psychotic patient. The psychotic paradigm are the hallucinated voices. One can also find delirious intuition where the subject attributes an enigmatic signification to certain event without being able to make explicit what it is. Echoes of thoughts, where the subject hears his thought repetitively, going as far as to attribute resonance to someone. Imposed thoughts, where the subject does not recognize the chain of signifiers. And this can be very subtle and confused with an obsessional idea. But the most important thing is the kind of autonomy of the thought for these patients, what Clérambault called mental automatism. Well, the question is for us that Freud says that if it is a psychotic, I think it's better is that you don't take him or her to analysis. Well, the position of Lacan is completely different. All he structured about the psychosis theory is saying to us that we should accept patients on analysis. Freud describes the function of the diagnostic in this text on the beginning of the treatment, precisely as regard of the treatment of psychosis. He's very worried about that. He says, I am aware that there are psychiatrists who hesitate less often in their differential diagnosis, but I have become convinced that just as often they make mistakes. To err, moreover, is of far greater moment for the psychoanalyst than it is for clinical psychiatrists, as he is called. Where the psychoanalyst is concerned, however, if the case is unfavorable, he has committed a practical error. He has been responsible for wasted expenditure and has discredited his method of treatment. He cannot fulfill the psychoanalyst cannot fulfill his promise of cure if the patient is suffering not from hysteria, but from paraphrenia, is one of the names of schizophrenia. And he, therefore, has particularly strong motives for avoiding error in diagnosis. Well, we agree with Lacan when he says that a subject, as such, cannot be cured. We cannot handle the promise of a cure of the subject because we cannot cannot transform a psychotic into a neurotic. We cannot cure him of his unconscious. Inasmuch analysis is one can go through, even when one goes through one's fantasy reaching the end of analysis, then conscious will not cease to manifest itself. We don't cure anybody of his unconscious. Nonetheless, which promise of cure is the analyst unable to sustain in psychosis? We are unable to say that he's going to be a neurotic. But if the subject is a psychotic, it's important that the analyst knows it for the direction of the treatment. I think so. Because he has not the name of the father and castration as a reference. Thus, we have the importance of detecting the subject's clinical structure during these preliminary interviews. Another way of interpreting the Freudian text, which I do not share, is to consider that Freud was against psychoanalysis for psychotics. One thing is, we cannot promise to cure. Another thing is, analysis is forbidden for psychotics. As for instance, they say now, since some long time ago, that the autists cannot be treated by psychoanalysts. You know, there is a kind of a movement in France against the analysts taking care of the autists. We can say maybe it's a kind of a misinterpretation of Freudian text, I don't know. But in Lacan, we find certain indications which point to the need for caution, although he leaves it up to each analyst to decide whether or not to accept a psychotic for analysis. It happens that we accept pre-psychotics for analysis, and we know what the result will be, psychotics, said Lacan in Seminar 3. Analysis, being the place where speech is grasped, may lead to the triggering, setting off of a psychosis, which had been hitherto been declared. We also find, nevertheless, other indications. Paranoia, or rather psychosis, is absolutely fundamental to Freud. Psychosis is that which the analyst must not shy away from under any condition. So this is the proposition of Lacan. In these cases, we may interpret that when confronted with the psychosis, which has already been triggered, there is no reason for the analyst not to accept the subject's demand. Lacan gives another end, but if the psychosis is not already triggered, you can handle it in another way, I think. Accept the analysis for analysis, but you must take care of it. Lacan gives other indications concerning the structure of the psychotic transference, which at least showed that his position is not one of thinking that analysis is not inadvisable. In Freud's papers, we can find many cases of psychotic subjects treated by psychoanalysis. So Freud says so, but we know that Freud has many psychotics in analysis. As the direction of the treatment during the preliminary interviews, it is important to go beyond the level of the clinical structures, I think, psychosis, neurosis, and perversions, to reach the level of the two clinical types, hysteria and obsessional neurosis, if we can. although there should be some hesitation in order that the analyst may establish what? A strategy for directing the cure to avoid its being ungoverned. The basis of the analyst's strategy in directing the treatment regards the transference to which the diagnosis must be correlated. Because Lacan says in the direction of the treatment that every treatment has a direction. It's not only free association. There is a direction. And he says, in this, we have the tactics, the strategy, and the politic. The strategy is the interpretation, the tactics is the interpretation, the strategy is the handling of the transfers, la manœuvre du transfert. Handling, I think it would be handling the transfers, and the politics is the lack of being. So the direction of the cure, I think, so the this diagnosis, of course, everyone has a different diagnosis. With this, we can say this is kind of a general diagnosis, neurosis, psychosis, etc. But of course, the analyst will take the analysis as as one subject different from any other. So, since the analyst will be called upon to occupy the place of the other, the big other, given by the subject to whom the demands are addressed, it is important to detect in the preliminary work the modality of the subject's relation to the other, to the big other. For the obsession neurotic, the other relishes a terrifying and mortifying jouissance, as illustrated by the cruel captain, brought to the forefront through his story of the punishment with rats in the case of the rat man. For the hysteric, the other is the other of desire, marked by the absence or the impotence to reach jouissance, as is demonstrated by Dora's father, whose desire she sustains with the symptom of the aphony, the loss of voice. This connotation of the hysteric sexual jouissance, of a lesser pleasure, and the obsession of greater pleasure is pointed out by Freud as far back as he noticed, taken in draft K of his correspondence with Fliess. With the intention of establishing an etiology for neurosis, he attempts to differentiate jouissance and obsession neurosis and paranoia, beginning with the mode of jouissance experienced during the first sexual encounter and the vicissitude of the representation linked to this experience. So, since the beginning or before the beginning of psychoanalysis, Freud is worried about the question of the jouissance and the question of how do you react in regards to the encounter of the jouissance. So this form of qualifying the clinical types mode of jouissance is a diagnostic criteria which is determined by, of course, the fundamental fantasy of the subject, which should not be disregarded during the preliminary interviews. Sometimes, what I want to say with this, that sometimes we can see the position of jouissance of the patient. Something that we can making a hypothesis of his position in the fantasy with what he is saying. And I think is also in these preliminary interviews, we can have attention for this thing. And the last point, the transference function. In the beginning of psychoanalysis is transference. Lacan tells us, and its pivot is the subject supposed to know. Sujet supposé savoir. The subject's appearance under transference is what gives the signal of the interest in analysis. And this subject is linked to knowledge. I was talking about in the beginning of this conference about the desire to know. This is what may be apprehended through the formulation of the rule of free association by Frau Amy von N, when she asks Freud to keep quiet. She sustains a knowledge which is present in what she has to say herself. So be quiet, listen, because what I'm going to talk, what I'm going to tell you, there's something that is important, there's some knowledge in it. The decision to find an analyst is related to the hypothesis that there is a knowledge at stake in the symptom, or in that which the person wishes to be freed from. This is a pre-interpretation formulated by the subject regarding his symptom. It might deliver a knowledge. If there is no this pre-interpretation, he or her, they're not, or she, they're not going to see an analyst. They're going to see another, a priest, for instance, if the pre-interpretation is, I think I have a sin, I have the devil in my body, I am possessed, or someone made me think, I don't know what. So the pre-interpretation is very important to someone goes to an analyst. Otherwise, he or she is going to see another one. So the establishment of transference may sometimes is before the meeting of the analyst. The establishment of transference is necessary in order that the analysis may begin. This is what I call the transferential function of the preliminary interviews. The transference is not conditioned nor motivated by the analyst. It is there, says Lacan in the proposition, accorded by the analysant. We do not have to present reasons for what condition its existence. Here it is right from the beginning. So we are not responsible for the transference. This is the problem of the analysant. The transference is not therefore a function of the analyst, but of the analysant. The analysant functions is to know how to manage it, how to handle the transference. The first formulation of this question can be found in Lacan's article, The Function and Field of Speech and Language, his first paper on psychoanalysis, as he said. The returning to Freud. And as you are in this seminar, returning to Freud, I think we can remember it. When he refers the transference of knowledge, It is an illusion in which the subject believes that his truth is already present in the analyst, and he knows it beforehand. This subjective error, because the transference is a subjective error, is inherent to the entry into analysis. The subjectivity in question is in correspondence to the constitution effects of transference, which are different from the effects already constituted previous to that moment. This subjectivity, correlated to knowledge as a constitution effect of transference, is what Lacan will formulate under the term of sujet supposé savoir, subject supposed to know. Each time, says Lacan in Seminar 11, each time that for the subject, this function of the subject supposed to know is incarned by someone, whomever he should be, analyst or not, this means that the transference has already been established. The subject supposed to know is defined by Lacan at the beginning of his teaching as the one who is constituted by the analyst in the figure of his analyst. But later on, Lacan will make him the equivalent of God, the Father. So if you put the analyst in this place, he is going to be in the place of God, the supposed to know, the divine subject supposed to know. To identify with such a position is to transform the analysis into a practice based on a theology or a theory which does not include the lack. As I was saying in the beginning, if you respond from this place, if you act from this place, the separation of the function of the subject supposed to know from the analyst as a person will appear clearly in Lacan's formalization of the entry into analysis, a formalization which is elaborated with his algorithm of transference that we find in this algorithm, well known, that you find in the proposition of the 9th October. You know that the proposition, the famous proposition of 9 October, Lacan's famous text where he proposes the pass, the guarantee of the school and so on, that we wrongly call institutional text, is one of our institutional texts, is one of the most clinical Lacanian texts, where he takes exactly this metaphor, this Freudian metaphor of the beginning of treatment. I'm going to read to you on beginning of the treatment, the famous the famous metaphor of the chess. He says, Freud, anyone who hopes to learn the noble game of chess from books will soon discover that only the openings and the endgames admit of an exhaustive systematic representation, and that the infinite variety of moves which develop after the opening define any such description. Well, in the proposition, Lacan exactly established the opening and the endgame with the pass. He proposes a formula of the beginning and no formula at all for the endgame, which he proposed that each one is going to find his formula for the end, but he gives many clues for the end of analysis in this text. So the proposition is a response of what Freud is calling here. This is here on the beginning of the treatment where we find the famous metaphor of the chess for analysis. And well, the algorithm of transference is the theme of the entry in analysis. It is the formalization which is in resonance with what Freud postulates as the beginning of his text on the beginning of treatment, when he makes the famous comparison between psychoanalysis and the game chess. Well, so the algorithm of transfers is an answer to Freud's proposition. Well, the S here, this S is the signifier of transference. And this part represents the analyst, and here the analyst. Here we have the signifier of the transfers linked to any signifier, significant quelconque, a signifier of the analyst. Well, and here we have what is the formalization, Lacan's formalization of the free association, the signifier chain. So this the signifier, which is fabricated by the analyst, will make him choose his particular analyst. It can be a family name or some particular trait. It not depends on you, analyst. It depends on him. Ah, you have the voice of my grandfather. Ah, you have the eyes of my mother. Oh, you are, I don't know what, but something that linked is, how do you say, a bond, an unconscious bond, a signifier bond, a symbolic bond that happens like that. Sometimes the patient, the analyst, has no idea exactly, but I think I always ask, why do you choose me? I think it's good to know for us, where is the link, where is the bond, and maybe something, or even if there's no bond at all at the beginning, and he or she finds something in your consulting room that makes a bond. And now with the online, I don't know what, but can be, we can make a research, about what can be these traits that the analyst. Well, it can be, for instance, if one of you writes books or articles and so on, or I read something that was that made me think of this or that, that can be this link. So this link is something that is a signifier, the geniality of Lacan said there is a signifier of your unconscious, even if it's conscious, but it is yours in your history or unconscious, that is going to be linked with something that you find in the analyst. So this establishes an S1 and S2. So the S1 and S2, it makes a chain. And this is the chain that allows that I'm going to put, if I am an analyst with my trait, that I have a trait that I find in my analyst, that is going to make me address my unconscious to this person, to address. And this address, putting my unconscious on in the free association, is the transference. Is exactly the transference. So, and what we have, the effect of this connection between the S of transference and the NES of the analyst, what is the effect? Is the subject of the free association. I said in English, any signifier. Lacan says signifiant quelconque, any signifier. It doesn't matter what, but it's any signifier. So this subject of the free association is not, so it is produced. I think this is the subject analysant, the analysant of the free association connected with the analyst by the unconscious chain. It's something very crazy, isn't it? But it is like that. It's crazy. But if someone who is not in our milieu listen to us, they are completely crazy. What is this connection? They are imagining things and so on. But it is like that. It's this unconscious connection, and makes me address my unconscious to the analyst, in this place of the big other, because my unconscious is connected with this address, and it makes my unconscious exist. My unconscious will exist from this point. So the transfers make the unconscious exist with the free association. Sometimes the analyst said, I was talking with you during all this week. Every day I was talking with you, because it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. So the dress is there all the time, not only during the sections of the analysis, but all the time. So the subject is supposed to know, upon the foundation of the transverse phenomenon, does not bring, says Lacan, the certainty to the analyst. The analyst knows every much. Far from it. The subject is supposed to know is perfectly compatible with the factor that it is conceivable that by the analysis, that the knowledge sustained by the analyst is quite doubtful. You know, because the subject is supposed to know if the analysis, how can I say, projects this function to the analyst, it is a function that occurs by itself. It is there. It is there in a way independent of the analyst. So is this function linked with the free association and the addressing the unconscious there, that will going to fall at the end of analysis. Because the analysis supposes knowledge first to his symptom, supposes knowledge to the analyst, and then supposes knowledge of the process of his unconscious of analysis, and then all of a sudden, it's not so suddenly like as that, but all of a sudden it's going to fall. It's okay. I know enough. That's okay. I have no more symptoms. I'm happy. I'm not very happy, but it's okay. And then this function of the subject supposed to know has a destiny in analysis to fall, to disappear. Is a function that remains itself only during analysis, and it's going to fall when analysis finished. But the affect, there is an affect that I'm going to finish with this. The affect of the establishment of the so supposed to know is what? Is love. Love. With the appearance of love, we have the transformation of the demand. The transitive demand. Please tell me what does that mean? Please give me attention, etc. To become an intransitive demand, said Lacan, a demand for love, since love demands love. Because when the supposed to know established in this person is at the place of the big other. The big other, and we want love from the place who occupies, from the person who occupies this place. So love is the effect of transference, but an effect that has the aspect of resistance to desire, as desire of the other. Once this desire has appeared in the form of a question, que voy, the analysis responds with love, because he's a neurotic, he doesn't want to know, in a way. So he wants to be loved. It is up to the analyst to bring out from this demand its demand of love, its dimension of desire, which is also connected to the establishment of the subject supposed to know. It corresponds to the subject supposed to desire and conditions and supposed to desire. This is connected with the symptomatic function through bringing out the dimension of desire to make it appear as desire of the other, leading the symptom to the category of an enigma. So, the affect of transference as a resistance is the demand of love. The most important thing is love. So I don't want to know more anything, nothing about my desire. This is an aspect of the resistance of transference, the demand of love. So it is not enough to demand to be freed of a symptom. It must appear to the subject as an enigma and therefore something to be deciphered through the dynamics of transference. So the transference is at the same time a motor, a mobile, and a resistance. It makes you go into the process of analysis, but at the same time, you can resist with the demanding of love. And what does this transference love want? He wants to love, but it wants to know. Transference itself is defined by Lacan as love which seeks to know. It's not exactly to seek, but c'est l'amour qui s'adresse au savoir. What is transference? Is love addressing itself to knowledge. This love is paradoxical. Is a love I want to know, and I don't want to know, I want to be loved. There's a paradox in it. Nevertheless, its finality, as it is for all love, is not knowledge itself, but the fundamental of the love, which is the object cause of desire. I want to be loved, but more than that, I want to be the cause of your desire. This object, the object A, is what confers the real aspect of the transference. So we saw the symbolic transference, the demand of love, that is quite of imaginary in it, but the real transference is linked to object A, is the place of the object, the analyst in the place of the object A, of semblant of object A, and this encounter, this TK with the analyst in this place is the real aspect of transference, which correspond to the putting into action what Lacan called the sexual reality of the unconscious, is the real. Transference as an encounter belonging to the order of the real of sex comes to counter transference as a repetition, where the signifiers of the demand are addressed to the other of love, where the analyst is placed. So this place of the big other that the analyst puts the analyst, where it puts the analyst must not respond from that place, but from the place of object A, with this act. So not giving knowledge, but making him produce knowledge and decipher knowledge, etc. It is the object A. This is the place of object A. So the transference and is what Lacan grasped in Plato's Symposium, the agalma. The agalma, the precious object. There is something very precious that is hidden. That is agalma. The transference as a way of bringing out the sexual reality of the unconscious is based upon this agalma that the analyst has, in a way. The cause of desire found by the analyst in his or her analyst. It is the essence of desire. And this agalma is correlated to the subject supposed to know. At the same time, as the subject supposed to know is established, the analyst is at the same time placed in this, because he has the object is there, even if it is hidden. So this agalma, this object A, is the essence of transference. And this agalma is correlated to the subject supposed to know. So in the transference function of the preliminary interviews, the analyst should know that he represents this agalma to his patient and should assume it by make believe, faire semblant, in order to cause transference, not respond from the place of subject supposed to know, and cause analysis itself. Well, I think I talk a little bit too much, but that's it.
Thank you so much, Antonio. We're wondering if we could take a 2-minute break and return for some questions. Would that work for you?
Okay, it's okay.
So we will have 2 minutes, no more than 2 minutes, and then a break.
5 minutes.
5-minute break. Okay, that's perfect.
And
And
we,
then if you're willing to entertain questions, we can have some questions for 15-20 minutes.
okay, 15-20 minutes. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
We'll break now for 5 minutes.
Okay.
Well, it looks like we have a couple of questions already, so we'll start with Wilfred. Unmute yourself, Wilfred.
Yes. Antonio, this is a very interesting talk, covers broad things. I do treat a schizophrenic person. His breakdown came when his mother divorced the third husband she had. And that third husband was, according to the mother, a child. But I learned that that child husband played with a 16-year-old. Now, the challenge was he said nothing. So he had no relation with language and he reacted to nothing. Whatever I suggested, he said, I don't know. But slowly he reacted to the description of his food. So at that point, he was willing to continue talking about the oral dimension. Now, in the last 2 sections, he mentions, maybe or 4 sections, he mentions that he talks to a lady that he met, but she calls him and she talks and he listens to her. And the last session, he said that he also started to talk. So my sense is that the big challenge for treating serious schizophrenics is the introduction of language. And so I cannot ask, what did you eat? I simply said, so when you get up, I wonder what you were eating.
Great. It's a good strategy, Wilfred. Very good strategy. But I did. So he told you that he is doing with this lady the same
Yes.
thing you are doing with him, in a way.
Mm. Well, but I have to do the talking with the lady. He doesn't.
Yeah.
So he listens to what the lady is doing. And so he is not able to translate into words his own experience.
Okay.
But that's how I interpret it. And
Yes,
so,
but in a way, I think the analysis, or what we call that we do with them, is a place that you can offer him the opportunity to put in language what is the most difficult to him. So I think I agree with you. To enter into language is to put in language this abstract or enigmatic feelings and so on, or even the most simple experience that he has. I think only the opportunity to talk and to be listened is very important, is much more important than we imagine. So I think I agree with you in a way. That is the opportunity to put on language, to enter the experiences in language. I agree with you. It's very
Something
important.
happened. Something happened. He called me one day before the appointment. So that means there is already a transference, even if it doesn't show in the treatment, because he never
Exactly.
calls. He never calls.
Sure.
And so I wait 15, 20 minutes, and then I call. He doesn't answer. I call his mother, and the mother calls him, and then we connect. So he is not yet capable of an active transference.
Yes, but in a way, the transference is already established. In a way.
Yeah, but at a very low level.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, that's it.
Good.
The problem with psychotics is this dimension of the demand, but because sometimes they don't have any demand, and but the family has the demand. But when they began to speak, and when they found an analyst who is listening carefully, etc., the demand can come.
You are right. He has no demand. He fills his day by eating and watching TV.
Well, but you are provoking the demand. That's good.
Yeah. I have to provoke it. Yes.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Alejandra?
Hi, yes. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you. Yeah, I wasn't sure if I heard well. What I heard was the first logical moment of being when there is the passage from the complaint, let's say the patient, to then the analytic demand. Did I hear that well?
No, from the complaint to the analytic symptom. The analytic symptom, and when the analyst addresses the symptom as a question to the analyst.
Yes, the S to SQ.
Establishing the
Sure.
subject supposed to know.
Yes. Well, were you describing that as the first logical moment?
Yeah.
And the first act?
That's right.
Okay, because I was curious about that.
Yeah, that's
yes.
right.
I was curious about that.
When, for instance, to give a Freudian example, when Dora came to see Freud, complaining about her father, about Mrs. K, etc. Everybody was against her. She was a little bit persecuted by everybody. Everybody was, but she was complaining about her father mainly. And Freud says, okay, but what is your responsibility in everything you are complaining? What can you do about it? What is your responsibility? And I think this is, how can I say, a strategy, and he says this before beginning analysis. I think is one of the functions also of this trial period, is to responsabilize, to make responsible, to make the patient be responsible of his suffering, of what he's complaining about. It's not the father or the mother who are guilty, but, and you, what are you doing about that? What is your responsibility? So,
yes, and you say that in terms of before the analysis begins. So this is what I'm pointing at, that that there is perhaps a logical moment and a first step of the analytic act before analysis begins. This is something actually Colette Soler has spoken about quite a lot in terms of the offer and the response. And it's something that I agree with, that the offer of the analyst, which is precisely an offer with the aim of establishing transference, is prior. So there is actually a logical moment and at least a first aspect to the analytic act before that passage from preliminary to analysis. Well, this is why I was curious about, you know, where you are putting the first logical times, logical moments, and so on. And I'm curious about that.
No, that you're right. The prior is the transference. You're right. I agree with you.
Okay,
Because without this, an analysis will not begin. You're right.
Thank you.
Okay.
I see that Tamara has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. Thank you very much, Antonio, for your presentation. I was thinking in this commentary that you made at some point where you just say a bit comically, you know, people may hear us and, you know, about all this assemblage that is requiring the transference between the analysand's knowledge, subject supposed to know, etc., and may think that we are crazy. And it occurs to me that, you know, we are now speaking in English to an audience, Anglophone audience. It occurs to me that in part that has a lot to do with this concept of the subject, that is the sort of the base that we assume as a given, but is actually strange to, you know, even to other cultural realms. I'm thinking, for example, to the assumption of the individual, you know, the gap between subject and individual. And so I was wondering, you know, what if you have any comments about that?
That's right, because we must learn another logic, another way of thinking when we make psychoanalysis. We must learn another language, another vocabulary, and another logic that is completely different from the ego or the conscience or the common sense. It's not the common sense. It's a concept. Then when we establish the subject, it's not the person, that the symptom represents the subject. What is that? But for us, it represents. So where there's an expression, where there is a smoke, there's this fire. For us, if the symptom, if the smoke, the fire is the subject. So it's not when someone, oh, I have this, I am suffering, oh, poor you, etc. You're going to be solidary with him, etc. It's not analysis, it's another thing. So, but we are looking for the subject. We are provoking where the subject is with his manifestation, with the language of the unconscious that we must learn. We learn in how to apprehend the unconscious in our analysis, and then with the text and discussing as we are doing, etc. here, to be able to receive the analysis and transform a common dialogue into an analysis. That's quite strange, really. You're right. Okay. Wilfred wants your microphone
Yes.
is.
So I have a patient whose mother was schizophrenic, and she was put in adopting houses and so on. So here, it's not just the absence of the father, which Lacan addresses. It's the absence of the mother. And what ideas do you have if it is the absence of relations to the mother that is at the basis of the symptoms of the patient?
Well, the name of the father is a concept. It's not exactly the father.
Yeah.
This is not exactly the father. And if we think that the mother is the place is at the place of the big other, of course, it's very important, because Lacan says that the name of the father is in the discourse of the mother. Of course, the mother is very important, more than the figure. The person of the mother is more important than the person of the father. You're right. But we must not confound the name of the father with the biologic father.
Mm.
But you're right. I think you're right. Because if the mother is absent, how a subject will be born, will appear. You're right.
Are there other questions?
Yes, I think my hand doesn't.
Oh, okay.
Yes. No, thank you very much, Antonio. There are more comments, no? One related to Wilfred before the last about the patient, no? About the mother that called the patient, because this is the difference between subject and individual. The subject is not an individual. The subject is an immixtion of individuals. And the mother is one of the patient's demand, is part of the patient, is part of the subject, is in a place where she can talk, instead of the patient, is another way of thinking in Lacan's theory, that the patient is not an individual, is a subject in mixture of otherness. No, it's a history. This is one comment, and the other comment that Antonio's your wonderful presentation was very centered is in the question of knowledge. No, and here I will also place the difference between Freud and Lacan, because for Freud, we want to know. The child asks questions all the time because he wants to know about sexuality. And for Lacan, it's different. For Lacan is that the child asks questions all the time, but doesn't want to know, has an horror to knowledge. And I am thinking that is perhaps an hypothesis. This is the center of anti-Semitism, the horror to knowledge.
Yes.
And this
yes.
is our problem.
Yes. Lacan says that we have three passions: love, hate, and ignorance.
Yes, absolutely.
Ignorance is a passion also,
It's a
and
passion.
it's related to this horror of
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
It's related to the negationism. No?
Yes.
Yes. And this is exact. I think what we try to do in an analysis is to provoke this difficult desire of knowledge, you know, the desire to know where does it come from, where the causes, and etc. But at the same time, the patient doesn't want to know.
Yes. But you said it very
Because
well.
of repression. It's the same, you know, it's a paradox. We provoke the desire to know, making enigmas to him to go ahead. But at the same time, he resists, he doesn't want to know, he or she wants you to give the answer, etc.
But you said very well, this is the position of the hysteric discourse, wanting the desire of the other.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, can we finish? If there's no more.
Yes, we are at the moment to conclude and to say to you how grateful we are for such a wonderful, generous presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for being with me.
Thank you very, very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
And you're going to put in a YouTube this conference in some.
Yes, if that's okay with you, we would love to do that.
Okay.
Excellent.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio, and the Forum of Washington.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Antonio.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, are we ready to end?
Yeah, if you want to close the recording.